The FBI found me 30 years later. My wife was my sister. The sterile white form, stamped boldly in red ink with the word invalid, felt less like a piece of paper and more like a warrant for my execution. I was standing in the opulent downtown Seattle office of my own tech firm, Thorn Innovations, a company I had built from nothing over 15 years, and my entire reality was dissolving into dust. The man across the polished mahogany table wasn't an investor. He was Agent Harris of the FBI, and his face was grim. We were finalizing a massive federal contract, the culmination of a lifetime of work, when the deep background check flagged something catastrophic about my social security number. "Mr. Thorne," Harris said, his voice flat, "we need to know where you acquired this identity. The system shows the legal owner of this number, a child named Elias Thorne, died 34 years ago at the age of 2. I remember the blood draining from my face. I was 35. I stared at the man whose name I had always carried, Elias Thorne, CEO, husband to the most wonderful woman in the world, Clara. But according to the federal government, that Elias Thorne had been dead for over 3 decades. "I don't understand," I managed, my voice a hollow whisper. "That's my number. I've used it since I was a child. Taxes, licenses, mortgages, everything." I thought back to my youth, a difficult, joyless period spent in the austere care of foster mother Eleanor Vance. She was a woman of rigid rules and fewer smiles, always insisting on absolute privacy, homeschooling me through high school and moving us frequently across state lines. Now, those memories didn't seem like eccentricities. They seemed like evidence. Agent Harris didn't blink. "We believe you are a victim of severe identity theft, possibly tied to a long unsolved missing persons case. Based on the falsified birth records and the age discrepancy, we have reason to believe the person who gave you this number was trying to bury your real identity." My carefully constructed life, the penthouse apartment overlooking Puget Sound, the multi-million-dollar business, the stable, loving marriage, was a fabrication built on a ghost's ledger. The FBI didn't charge me, but they essentially detained me. My company was temporarily seized pending investigation, and I was forced to call Clara. Clara, my steadfast, gentle wife, who managed a local nonprofit. When I told her the basics, that my identity was fraudulent and the FBI was involved, she listened with terrifying calm, promising to come immediately. She was my rock, the only real piece of warmth in my whole history. When she arrived, she looked at the agents with fierce protective instinct, but she looked at me with pure, undiluted fear. "Who are you, Elias?" she asked, not accusingly, but with genuine panic, tears already tracking down her cheeks. I had no answer. I was stripped down to nothing. Fingerprints, retinal scans, DNA swabs. I was processed like a Jane Doe found on the street. All the while, I kept reliving my childhood, remembering Eleanor's tight-lipped secrecy, her absolute refusal to ever discuss my birth father or mother, claiming they were gone and that the topic was forbidden. She had always told me, "Elias, you only have me. Don't trust anyone else." Now I realized the depth of her lie. That night, sitting under the harsh fluorescent lights of the FBI holding room, I faced the terrifying truth. I had spent 35 years living someone else's death, and the man I thought I was
The FBI field office in downtown Seattle became my second home for the next 48 hours. They ran my biological data through every missing persons registry, every cold case file, and every governmental database across the country. I sat in a small, windowless interview room, trying to process the concept of non-existence. Agent Harris, along with Agent Reyes, cycled through asking me about Eleanor Vance, my foster mother. I detailed the constant fear I lived under, not physical abuse, but psychological confinement. Eleanor controlled every aspect of my life, what books I read, what music I listened to, and certainly who I spoke to. Any inquiries about my origins were met with stony silence and swift punishment, usually isolation or the removal of privileges, however few they were. "Did she ever mention your real name or your biological parents?" Reyes asked, flipping through a thick file. "Never. She called my past a troubled history and said I was lucky she rescued me. I told them about Robert Eleanor Eleanor's husband, a quiet, hulking man who worked odd construction jobs and rarely spoke. He seemed perpetually scared of Eleanor and, by extension, scared of me. They weren't a family. They were custodians of a dangerous secret. Clara spent hours waiting outside, allowed in only 4 short, monitored visits. Her presence was the only thing grounding me. She reminded me of the life we built, the true, authentic love we shared, irrespective of whatever name was on my birth certificate. We'll get through this, Elias. We'll find out who you are. Together, she promised, holding my hand so tightly my fingers ached. Then came the first definitive break. Reyes burst back into the room, face alight. We have a preliminary hit. Your DNA matches a sample provided 33 years ago in connection with the disappearance of a child named Elias Thorne in Redmond, Washington. My head snapped up. Redmond, barely 20 minutes from where I lived now. But wait, I stammered. The SSN belonged to a child named Elias Thorne who died in Montana. My DNA matches a missing child named Elias Thorne in Redmond. Harris nodded, the gravity returning to his expression. This is where it gets complicated. The deceased child was used as a cover. Your biological parents, Carlos and Victoria Thorne, reported you missing in 1990. They never stopped looking. They even provided their DNA to national databases. You are their son. A wave of dizziness hit me. I had a name. I had parents. They were still alive. They had spent 3 decades grieving a missing child. And that child was me. The next step was confronting the lie. The agents drove me to the small, dilapidated house in eastern Washington, where Eleanor and Robert Vance still lived, a place I had unseen since I ran away at 18 to start my life. The scene was chaotic. The FBI had already attempted contact. The door was ajar, and inside, the furniture was overturned. They were gone. Reyes examined a hastily packed suitcase and a burner phone left on the kitchen counter. They ran as soon as the system flagged your SSN. They knew the past was coming for them. They likely had an escape route planned for decades. The realization hit me. My parents were criminals. Kidnappers, possibly part of a much wider network. The life they built for me was a prison designed to keep their crimes buried. My only remaining hope was the reunion with my true parents, the Thornes, the people who shared my actual blood, who might finally explain the 3-decade hole in my life. The search for Eleanor Vance and her husband Robert was immediately elevated, but my focus had shifted entirely to the Thornes, Carlos and Victoria Thorne, my biological parents. They lived just across Lake Washington, in the affluent suburbs of Bellevue, maintaining the same address for 30 years, a testament to their unwavering hope that I would one day find my way home. The FBI had handled the initial contact, cautious of the shock. I didn't want a clinical meeting in the field office. I wanted it to be private, raw, and real. Agent Harris drove me there, the short journey feeling like a passage through time. We pulled up to a magnificent, modern glass and steel house overlooking the water, far grander than anything I had built for myself. As we approached the front door, the weight of 33 stolen years crashed down on me, making my legs shake. The door opened slowly. Carlos Thorne, a distinguished man with silver hair and kind, weary eyes, stood there. Next to him, Victoria, elegant and fragile, her face etched with perpetual sadness. When their eyes met mine, a silent acknowledgement passed between us. I saw my own features reflected in Carlos's jawline, and the familiar sorrow in Victoria's deep blue eyes. Elias, Carlos whispered, his voice cracking, the sound of 3 decades of suppressed grief. Victoria simply let out a choked sob and rushed forward. She didn't speak, she just threw her arms around me, holding me with a primal force that made my own chest ache. It was a hug I hadn't realized I needed, a confirmation that I was wanted, that I was real. My son, you're alive. We never stopped praying, Victoria murmured into my shoulder, soaking my borrowed shirt with her tears. Carlos stood back, allowing his wife the moment, his own face contorted by emotion. When he finally embraced me, it was solid, protective, and overwhelmingly paternal. We failed you, son. We should have watched you closer, he said, his voice heavy with self-recrimination. Inside, the house was a shrine to loss on the mantelpiece. A small, faded photograph of a 2-year-old boy, smiling, gap-toothed, confirmed my identity, Elias. They told me the story, a crowded street fair, a split-second distraction, and the empty space where my stroller had been.
His
The
own
police
face
investigation
contorted by
stalled.
emotion.
The private
When he
investigators
finally
faded,
embraced me,
but their
it
hope
was
never
solid,
died. They
protective,
told me about the
and
missing persons
overwhelmingly
flyers they
paternal.
put up every
We
year,
failed
the
you,
foundation
son.
they
We
started
should
in
have
my
watched you
name, and the
closer,
annual birthday cake
he
they
said,
ordered, always
his
saving
voice
a
heavy with
slice. It
self-recrimination.
was an overwhelming
Inside,
display
the
of
house
love,
was a
a
shrine
world
to
away
loss.
from the cold
On the
indifference of
mantelpiece,
Eleanor
a
Vance.
small,
They
faded
apologized
photograph of a
endlessly for the
2-year-old
pain I
boy,
endured, for the
smiling
poverty, the
gap-toothed,
fear, and the lie.
confirmed my
I
identity.
tried to explain that those
Elias.
hardships
They
had made
told
me
me the
strong,
story.
driven me
A
to
crowded
succeed.
street fair,
But those
a
words felt
split-second
hollow in the
distraction,
face of their
and the empty
decades of
space
sorrow.
where my stroller had been.
We tried to
The
fill the
police
void,
investigation
Elias.
stalled.
Carlos
The
confessed,
private
running a hand
investigators
through his
faded,
hair.
but
The
their
house
hope
felt
never
empty.
died. They
The
told me
silence
about
was
the missing
deafening.
persons flyers they
So
put up
we
every
did
year,
something
the
drastic,
foundation they
something we
started in my
regretted
name,
hiding for so
and the
long.
annual birthday cake
About
they
a year
ordered,
after you
always saving a
vanished,
slice.
we adopted
It was
another
an
child,
overwhelming
a
display
little
of
girl.
love. A
She was
world
supposed
away
to
from
bring
the
light
cold
back into the
indifference of
darkness.
Eleanor Vance.
My heart
They
swelled with
apologized endlessly
anticipation.
for the pain
I had a
endured,
sibling. Where
for
is
the
she?
poverty, the
I want to
fear,
meet her, I
and the
asked
lie.
eagerly.
I tried to
Victoria
explain
smiled,
that
a
those
genuine
hardships
light
had
in
made
her
me
eyes
strong,
for the first time.
driven me to
She's running a
succeed.
small
But
non-profit
those
in the
words
city.
felt hollow
She's
in the face
wonderful,
of their
Elias.
decades of
Her
sorrow.
name is
We
Clara.
tried to fill
We
the
named her
void,
Sarah
Elias,
initially, but she
Carlos
changed it
confessed,
later.
running a hand
At that
through his
moment,
hair.
the air
The house
crystallized.
felt empty.
Elias
The
Thorne,
silence
the man
was
who lived a
deafening.
ghost's life,
So we
felt
did
his blood
something
turn to
drastic,
ice.
something we regretted
Clara,
hiding
my
for
wife.
so long.
Sarah,
About
my
a year
sister.
after you
The same
vanished,
person.
we adopted another
The
child.
silence in the
A little
grand
girl.
living room was
She was
thick enough
supposed to
to
bring
drown
light
in
back
Carlos
into the
and
darkness.
Victoria Thorne.
My heart
Their
swelled
faces
with
alight
anticipation.
with the hope of
I had a
uniting their
sibling.
long-lost
Where
children,
is she?
stared at
I
me,
want to meet
waiting
her,
for my eager
I asked
response.
eagerly.
But I couldn't
Victoria
speak.
smiled,
I could
a
only hear the
genuine
name
light in her
Clara
eyes for the
echoing
first
against
time.
the horrifying
She's running a
reality.
small
Clara,
nonprofit
the
in the
woman
city.
I had
She's
married,
wonderful,
the woman I
Elias.
had loved
Her name is
completely
Clara.
for 8
We
years.
named her Sarah
The woman
initially,
who shared
but
my
she
bed,
changed it
my
later.
dreams,
At that
my
moment,
failures,
the
and
air
my
crystallized.
successes.
Elias
She was
Thorne,
their
the
adopted
man who
daughter,
lived a
Sarah,
ghost's life,
whom they had taken
felt his
in to
blood
fill the
turn to
void
ice.
left by my
Clara,
disappearance.
my wife.
And
Sarah,
now she was my
sister.
sister.
The same
I sank
person.
onto the
The
plush sofa,
silence in
the
the
rich
grand living
velvet
room
suddenly
was thick
feeling
enough to
like
drown
rough
in
burlap.
Carlos and Victoria
You
Thorne.
adopted a
Their
girl
faces
named
alight with the
Clara.
hope of
I
uniting
managed,
their
the words
long-lost
catching
children,
in my throat,
stared at me,
tasting like
waiting
ash.
for my eager
Carlos
response.
nodded,
But I couldn't
confused by
speak.
my sudden
I could only
paralysis.
hear the name
Yes,
Clara echoing
Clara.
against the
We raised her
horrifying
since she
reality.
was 3.
Clara,
She ran
the woman
away
I had
years
married,
ago, desperate
woman
for
I had loved
independence,
completely for
just
8
like
years.
you,
The woman who
Elias.
shared my bed,
But she's found
my
her way.
dreams, my
She works
failures,
at a
and my
non-profit
successes.
now,
She
fighting
was
for
their
social
adopted daughter,
justice.
Sarah,
She's
whom
truly
they had taken
remarkable.
in to fill the void
Where did you
left
find
by
her?
my
I
disappearance.
asked, my
And now
voice
she was my
dangerously
sister.
low.
I sank onto
Victoria
the plush
looked
sofa,
uneasy.
the
She
rich
came
velvet
through a
suddenly feeling
private,
like rough
secure
burlap.
adoption channel
You-
after a lot
You
of
adopted a
searching.
girl named
She was
Clara?
3 years
I
old,
managed,
found
the
abandoned
words
in a
catching
temporary
in my
shelter
throat,
in Arizona.
tasting like ash.
We moved
Carlos
heaven and
nodded,
earth to bring her here,
confused by
to
my
give her
sudden
a home.
paralysis.
My mind
Clara.
raced,
We
trying to
raised her
find a
since she was
loophole,
3.
a mistake.
She ran away years
Adopted,
ago,
not
desperate for
biological.
independence, just
Surely,
like you,
that
Elias.
made the
But
difference.
she's found her way.
But the sheer
She works at a
astronomical
nonprofit
improbability
now,
of the man who
fighting
lived
for
a
social
lie for
justice.
30 years,
She's truly
marrying the girl
remarkable.
his real
Where
parents
did you
adopted
find
to
her?
replace him,
I asked,
was
my
too
voice
much for
dangerously
my
low.
mind to grasp.
Victoria looked uneasy.
It was a cosmic
She
joke,
came through
a
a
cruel
private,
twist
secure
orchestrated
adoption
by
channel
a
after a lot of
malevolent
searching.
fate.
She
She
was
knows
3 years
she's
old,
adopted,
found
right?
abandoned
I
in a
asked.
temporary shelter in
Desperation
Arizona.
creeping into my
We moved
voice.
heaven and
Carlos
earth to bring her
sighed.
here,
Yes,
to
she
give her a
knew.
home.
She
My
insisted
mind
on
raced,
changing her
trying to
name
find a
from
loophole, a
Sarah to
mistake.
Clara when she
Adopted,
left us
not
at 25.
biological.
She wanted
Surely
a fresh
that made the
start,
difference.
away from the
But the sheer
expectations of the Thorne
astronomical
name.
improbability
We
of the man
respect
who
her
lived a
choice,
lie for
but
30
we've never
years marrying
stopped
the
trying
girl
to
his
reach
real
her.
parents adopted to
I
replace
pulled
him
out
was
my
too much
phone,
for my
my
mind to
hands
grasp.
shaking so
It was a
violently
cosmic
I
joke,
nearly dropped
a
it.
cruel twist
I scrolled through
orchestrated
my
by a malevolent
contacts,
fate.
finding
She
Clara's
knows
work
she's
number.
adopted,
I
right?
need to call
I
her.
asked,
She must know Idaho, what's happening? I lied, knowing the truth
Carlos
was
sighed.
far darker.
Yes, she knew.
I excused
She
myself
insisted
to the
on changing
garden,
her name
the
from
cool
Sarah to
Bellevue
Claire
air,
when she
doing
left
nothing
us
to
at
calm the
25.
inferno in
She
my
wanted a
chest.
fresh start,
I called her.
away from the
She answered
expectations of the Thorn
immediately,
name.
her voice
We
still
respect her
laced with
choice,
worry from the
but we've never
FBI
stopped
incident.
trying to reach her.
Elias,
I pulled out
are
my
you
phone,
okay?
my hands
What
shaking
did
so
they find
violently
out?
I nearly dropped
I
it.
took a breath,
scrolled through
trying
my
to form the
contacts,
words, but
finding
they stuck.
Clara's work number.
How do you
I
tell
need to
the
call
person
her.
you love
She must
more
know
than
what's
life
happening.
itself that you
I
might be
lied,
her brother?
knowing the truth
Clara,
was
I
far
found
darker.
them. My biological parents, Carlos and Victoria Thorne. A gasp of relief came over the line.
She answered
Oh,
immediately.
Elias,
Her
that's
voice
wonderful.
still laced with
I'm
worry
so
from the
happy for
FBI
you.
incident.
Clara,
Elias,
listen to me.
are you
I need
okay?
you to come
What
here
did
now.
they find out?
There's something.
I took a breath,
Something you
trying to
need to
form the
see.
words,
Something
but
I
they
need
stopped.
to show you.
How do you tell the person you love more than life itself that you might be her brother? Clara, I found them. My biological parents. Carlos and Victoria Thorne. A gasp of relief came over the line. Oh, Elias, that's wonderful. I'm so happy for you. Clara, listen to me. I need you to come here. Now, there's something you need to see. Something I need to show you. I didn't mention the adoption, the name Sarah, or the years of her own past she never spoke of. I didn't have the strength. She agreed instantly, sensing the profound shift in my tone. I returned to the living room, telling Carlos and Victoria that Clara was on her way. As they anxiously prepared for the reunion with their long-estranged daughter, I sat stone-faced,
The wait for Clara was agonizing. Every minute stretched into an hour, filled with false starts of conversation with Carlos and Victoria, who were oblivious to the impending disaster. They spoke lovingly of Sarah, sharing small anecdotes from her childhood scraped knee, a school play, the fierce independence that led her to leave home. Victoria showed me albums filled with pictures. Clara as a toddler, Clara as a rebellious teen, Clara graduating from college. I looked at the photos, seeing my wife's familiar smile, her bright eyes, and I felt a profound, chilling nausea. I was staring at my sister. The doorbell chimed, a small, polite sound that ripped through the silence like a gunshot. Carlos and Victoria rushed to the door. I stayed rooted to the sofa, unable to move, unable to breathe. Clara walked in, elegant and professional, carrying the familiar warmth and light that always defined her. Clara, Victoria cried, rushing forward, tears immediately springing to her eyes. Clara hugged her mother tightly, then turned to Carlos, embracing him with a genuine affection that surprised me, given their estranged history. They were overjoyed. They believed this was a moment of healing, of two long-lost children finally finding their way back to the fold. Then, Clara turned, her eyes landing on me. She smiled, relieved to see me safe and sound, and started walking toward me. Elias, they're wonderful. I'm so happy you finally. Her voice trailed off. Carlos stepped in, beaming. Clara, this is Elias, your biological older brother. The son we lost 33 years ago. The smile vanished from Clara's face. She froze 5 feet from me, her eyes wide, shifting from me to Carlos and Victoria, and back again. The color drained from her cheeks, leaving her skin alabaster white. The air crackled with unspoken terror. I knew instantly that she recognized them, not just as her adopted parents, but as the source of a deep, unhealed wound. She was trying to flee the Thorne family when she met me. Clara, I whispered, standing up, my knees threatening to give way. She took a staggering step back, shaking her head violently. Her eyes met mine, not with love, but with pure, unadulterated horror, mirroring the panic I had felt earlier that week. Her secret, that she was the adoptive daughter of the Thornes, that she had cut off contact to start fresh, was revealed at the worst possible moment. Then Carlos, noticing the profound terror in her eyes, stepped forward, his expression softening. It's all right, honey. You and Elias were separated by fate, but you're together now. You're our two children. Elias, this is your sister. Sarahu goes by Clara now. And there it was, the confirmation. Clara looked at me, her eyes filled with shame, panic, and a crushing realization of the past 8 years of our marriage. Her hand instinctively flew to her mouth, stifling a scream. No, Elias, no, it can't be, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Carlos and Victoria exchanged worried glances, utterly confused by the intensity of the reaction. I walked toward her, slowly, reaching out a trembling hand. Clara, we need to talk. We need to understand the adoption, the names. But before I could touch her, she recoiled violently, stumbling back until she hit the wall. The gravity of the situation, the possibility that we were blood relatives, that our entire relationship was an incestuous, generational mistake, hit her with the force of a physical blow. She turned, blinded by panic and guilt, and ran not toward the door, but deeper into the house, up the grand staircase. Carlos shouted her name. Victoria started sobbing. I stood there, watching the two people I loved most in the world flee from me. I was Elias Thorne, the man who had found his identity only to lose everything else. The irony was devastating. I had survived a kidnapping, a fraudulent life, and a corporate investigation, only to be destroyed by a single, catastrophic family reunion. Asterisk, if you were Elias, faced with the terrifying possibility that the person you built your life with was your own sibling based on decades of family secrecy and complex adoption history, what would be the first step you would take? Would you demand immediate clarity and risk destroying the relationship instantly, or would you retreat and try to process the unthinkable alone? Share your opinion and why in the comments below. The house devolved into immediate, catastrophic chaos. Clara's desperate flight upstairs signaled the absolute failure of the reunion. Carlos and Victoria, stunned and heartbroken, demanded explanations. I could only give them half-truths, omitting the full extent of our marriage for fear of pushing Victoria into shock. We know each other. We met in Seattle. I managed, my voice hoarse. She didn't know I was your son. I didn't know she was your adopted daughter. The revelation that their two long-lost children had found each other and fallen in love was supposed to be a miracle. Instead, it was a horror show played out in their marble foyer, while Carlos scrambled to call Clara's cell phone, which went immediately to voicemail. Victoria looked at me, her eyes clouded with deep, ancient fear. When did you meet her, Elias? When did you marry? She pressed. I told them the dates, the years of our relationship, the simple, quiet life we had built. The more details I gave, the more shattered their faces became. They were trapped between the joy of having me back and the terror of realizing their adopted daughter had married her biological brother or. So we all believed at that terrifying moment. We located Clara upstairs, curled into a fetal position in her old childhood room, rocking back and forth, sobbing uncontrollably. The door was locked. I knelt outside, pleading, Clara, please. It's okay. We need to talk. We need to know the truth. Go away. Don't touch me. She screamed, her voice muffled by the thick oak door. Her raw agony was unbearable. I realized she was dealing with the exact same horrific realization I was. Every shared moment, every intimate touch, every vow of love was now stained by the unthinkable shadow of incest. This was not just a legal or identity crisis. It was a moral, spiritual cataclysm. Carlos finally managed to pick the lock, and we entered the room. Clara shrank from me, scrambling to the far corner. Get him away from me, she pleaded to Victoria, who immediately rushed to comfort her. Honey, it's all right. We didn't know. This is a mistake. It's fate playing a cruel trick. I tried to approach, but Clara's terror was absolute. I can't look at you, Elias. We're siblings. Everything we had, it was a lie. She was hyperventilating, her body rigid with shame and revulsion. Victoria quickly called their private physician, terrified that Clara might suffer a breakdown. The doctor arrived and immediately administered a mild sedative to calm Clara down enough to speak. Later that evening, after Clara had fallen into a fitful, medicated sleep, Carlos pulled me aside, his face etched with responsibility. Elias, we have to know. We have to know the blood relation. I know Clara is adopted, but the circumstances were unusual. We need to know if the adoption process somehow failed to identify a relationship. We need to check both your DNA results against each other immediately. The weight of that DNA test hung over us all. It was the only thing that could save us or condemn us forever. Carlos, leveraging his corporate influence and wealth, fast-tracked the comparison. We needed a definitive answer, and we needed it before Clara woke up and tried to disappear again. While we waited for the medical team to process the samples overnight, I sat in the silent, ornate living room, the memory of Clara's look of horror searing into my mind. I finally understood the true depth of Eleanor Vance's crime. She hadn't just stolen my life. She had poisoned my future. This cosmic collision was the ultimate manifestation of the deception. I knew then that justice, not just clarity, was required. I had to find Eleanor Vance because I realized she was not just my kidnapper, but perhaps the key to Clara's own mysterious origins and the reason why this monstrous coincidence had been allowed to happen. My personal quest for identity had now turned into a desperate investigation to save the only love I had ever known. The DNA results were promised by dawn of night stretched into an endless vigil, thick with dread. Carlos paced the living room carpet, speaking in low, urgent tones on the phone, leveraging every contact he had to pressure the lab. Victoria stayed upstairs with Clara, holding her hand, waiting for her adopted daughter and her biological son to be either absolved or damned by genetic sequencing. I sat by the window, watching the lights of Bellevue shimmer across the water. The thought of Clara and me being related was a torment far greater than any fear of the FBI or losing my company. If the test confirmed we were full siblings, everything was over. The marriage was nullified by fate. The love was rendered monstrous. I replayed every memory our first date, the proposal on the mountain, the quiet comfort of our shared life, and felt a chilling wave of revulsion, not against Clara, but against the hidden history that had mocked our devotion. Around 4 a.m., Carlos re-entered the room, phone pressed to his ear, his face unreadable. He hung up and walked toward me, his movements stiff and uncertain. My heart hammered against my ribs, ready to burst. Well, I croaked. He swallowed hard. The results are inconclusive for a full sibling match, Elias, but they are not a negative match either. My momentary relief was strangled by deeper confusion. What does that mean, Carlos? Are we related or not? It means, he explained slowly, rubbing his temples, that there is a significant biological markers overlap, too high to be random coincidence, but too low to be full siblings. The probability suggests you are either half-siblings sharing one parent or first cousins with an exceptionally close match. The weight lifted slightly, only to be replaced by the sharp, terrifying reality of a partial connection. Half-siblings. The most likely scenario was that we shared the same father. This meant that the man who had abandoned or lost me had also fathered Clara, or vice versa, tying our separate pasts together with a single common thread of infidelity or tragedy, a thread tangled in the hands of the very criminals who stole us. Carlos looked at me with renewed purpose. We need to find Eleanor Vance. She is the nexus. She kidnapped you, and she was the only point of contact during Clara's adoption process, handling the paperwork through a shell agency. She knows the true identity of Clara's birth parents, and therefore the man or woman who connects you. The urgency was paramount. We were now operating on dual tracks, seeking justice against my kidnappers. And seeking the truth about Clara's parentage to save our marriage. Carlos marshaled his resources. Utilizing the data I had provided to the FBI about Eleanor's known contacts and old locations, we had a hitter small, off-the-grid cabin she often mentioned in the remote forests of northern Idaho. I immediately coordinated with Agent Harris, demanding they prioritize the arrest. Harris agreed, recognizing that Eleanor was the key to unlocking potentially several decades-old crimes, including possibly child trafficking associated with Clara's suspicious adoption process. While the FBI prepared the raid, Victoria managed to persuade Clara to talk. Clara, still deeply distressed but sedated, finally confessed the full story of her departure from the Thorns years ago. She revealed that she left not just because of their rigid expectations, but because she had begun researching her own adoption, finding inconsistencies and dark gaps in the paperwork managed by the private agency Eleanor Vance secretly operated. She ran away because she sensed the life she was given was built on a lie, a feeling eerily similar to my own, this common thread the deep. Destructive deception woven by Eleanor Vance and her network was the ultimate proof that our lives had been orchestrated toward this horrific collision. Clara wept, telling Victoria that she had abandoned the Thorn name because she felt suffocated by their expectations and haunted by the inconsistencies in her past. She had sought anonymity in El Paso, just like me, choosing the name Clara and building a life separate from the immense pressure of the Thorne fortune and the pain of her adoption. The revelation that I, Elias, the man she married and the only person who offered her genuine, unburdened love, was now inextricably linked to the very family she was running from manned, possibly her own siblings, her spiraling into despair once more. Victoria relayed this to me, heartbroken, emphasizing that Clara's secrecy was not malicious, but a desperate act of self-preservation. This understanding, though painful, shifted my perspective. Our relationship wasn't a lie. It was a deeply authentic love that happened to bloom in the poisoned soil of our shared, manipulated past. We were both victims of the same destructive force. This galvanized my resolve. I had to face Eleanor, not just for justice, but for Clara's peace and my own future. Within the next 24 hours, the FBI located and secured Eleanor Vance and Robert at the remote cabin in Idaho. They were hiding in squalor, attempting to liquidate assets and secure passage out of the country. I flew to Idaho immediately with Agent Harris, arriving at the desolate, heavily guarded cabin deep in the woods. The air was cold, scented with pine and impending confrontation. Eleanor sat at a small wooden table, pale and shackled, her rigid posture finally broken. Robert huddled nearby, whimpering. When Eleanor saw me, a successful, angry, determined man, she looked genuinely terrified. Elias, she croaked, you shouldn't have come back. You should have stayed away. I didn't allow her the familiarity of my stolen name. My name is Elias Thorne, and you will tell me everything. Start with the identity you stole, and end with the identity you gave Clara. Agent Harris nodded, indicating she must comply. Eleanor, facing decades in prison for kidnapping, fraud, and potentially deeper crimes, finally crumbled. She confessed to kidnapping me from the Redmond Street Fair on the order of an organized crime network specializing in the disappearance and resurfacing of children for ransom or covert adoption. She was the network's handler, tasked with maintaining my false identity. She confessed to acquiring the deceased, Elias Thorne SSSN, from a corrupt contact years later to provide me with a necessary legal foundation once I entered my teens. Then I pressed her on Clara Sarah. Where did she come from? Who is her biological father? Eleanor looked away, her lips tightening, trying to regain control. That's not your business, Elias. That's complicated. It is my business, I roared, slamming my fist on the table. It ruined my life and shattered my marriage. Tell me now. Robert, terrified of Eleanor but even more terrified of the justice system, finally spoke, his voice thin and reedy. Eleanor, tell him about the adoption fee, the papers. Eleanor hissed at him, but Robert persisted. The agency, that wasn't a legal adoption, it was a purchase. Clara's real father, he was a low-level smuggler, a contact of ours. He needed quick cash when his wife died, and he sold Clara to the network. They knew the Thornes were searching for a child to replace Elias. It was a financial transaction, a perfect cover for both of us. The room spun. Clara was sold. The pain of her past was deeper than just abandonment. Then came the devastating revelation, and the father of Clara, the smuggler. He was Robert's older brother, Carl Vance. You and Clara share the same uncle, Elias. You are first cousins by blood. The world stopped. Not siblings, cousins. A profound sense of release warred instantly with the continued horror of the revelation. The blood relation was real, confirming the inconclusive DNA results, tying us through Robert's criminal family tree. But the incestuous nightmare of siblinghood was lifted. I had the truth, and I knew what I had to do next. The truth, though shattering, brought a perverse form of relief. Clara and I were not siblings, but first cousins. The DNA overlap was explained by shared immediate ancestry, not parentage. The horror of incest was replaced by the deep, unsettling reality that our lives, stolen and managed by the Vance family, were always meant to converge in some dark familial tangle. Eleanor and Robert were immediately transported back to Washington to face charges for kidnapping, identity fraud, and involvement in organized child trafficking. The FBI had sufficient evidence to dismantle the shell adoption agency linked to the Vances. Finally, family bringing decades of secret crimes to light. But my immediate focus was Clara. I returned to Seattle, bursting into the Thorne Villa, where she was still recovering, physically present, but emotionally absent. I found her in the library, staring out at the rain, Victoria quietly sitting beside her. "Clara," I said, my voice thick with emotion, "we need to talk. I found Eleanor. I have the absolute truth." She turned, her eyes dull. "The truth. That we're abominations, that our love was a mistake orchestrated by fate." I knelt before her, taking her hands. They felt cold and fragile. "No, the truth is, we are first cousins. We are not siblings. We share an uncle, Robert Vance's brother, Carl, who was Clara's biological father and a low-level contact of Eleanor purchased Clara through a criminal network and sold her to Carlos and Victoria. Knowing they were desperately seeking a replacement for me, she orchestrated both our disappearances and our subsequent convergence through the Thorne family. It's monstrous, but our marriage is not incestuous. We are safe. The relief that washed over Clara's face was palpable. It wasn't instantaneous joy, but the lifting of an unspeakable, damning guilt. She buried her face in my shoulder, sobbing uncontrollably, but these were tears of release, not despair. "We're okay, Elias. We're okay." Over the next few days, the Thornes and I focused entirely on Clara's recovery. The emotional trauma was immense. She had to process the fact that her whole life was a lie, that she had been purchased, and that the man she loved was related to her through the very family that stole us both. It was a wound that would take years to heal. Carlos, grappling with the knowledge that he had unknowingly funded a criminal network that abused his adopted daughter, promised to use the full weight of the Thorne Foundation to investigate and dismantle every remaining part of the Vance operation. The legal battles commenced, complex and international, involving multiple states and jurisdictions. I had to face the legal proceedings regarding my own fraudulent identity. Given the FBI's findings that I was a child victim, all past financial crimes related to the SSN were waived. My company, Thorne Innovations, was restored, though the process of legally transferring assets under my real name, Elias Thorne, was complex and lengthy. I chose to keep the name Elias Thorne, embracing the real identity my birth parents had given me, finally burying the ghost of the deceased child whose identity I had worn for so long. The relationship with Clara was rebuilt, not from where we left off, but from the ground up, based on shared pain and absolute transparency. We had to redefine our love, acknowledging the immense shared trauma. The question was no longer whether we were related, but whether we could survive the devastating knowledge of how we were related, bound by kidnapping, secrecy, and criminal bloodlines. We began couples therapy, intensive sessions dedicated to separating the actions of Eleanor Vance and the network from our shared devotion. Clara confessed her years of secrecy, the shame she felt over her adoption, and the reasons she abandoned the Thorne name. I confessed the loneliness of my childhood and the intense fear of exposure that had driven my relentless ambition. Carlos and Victoria were pillars of support, demonstrating remorse and unwavering love. They embraced Clara's decision to keep her preferred name, Clara, over the adoptive name, Sarah, and they acknowledged that their desire to replace me had caused immense collateral damage. They spent hours with us, going through documents, ensuring every legal ambiguity surrounding Clara's adoption was resolved, and that her inheritance rights were secured. The entire Thorne family was forced to confront the dark legacy of my kidnapping and Clara's purchased adoption, resulting in a profound shift toward honesty and accountability. Meanwhile, the legal proceedings against Eleanor and Robert Vance gained momentum. The evidence of kidnapping, running a covert adoption ring, and decades of fraud was overwhelming. The trial was highly publicized, gaining national attention due to the high profile of the Thorne family and the bizarre, heartbreaking nature of the case, the man who was stolen and the girl who was bought marrying each other years later. I testified, detailing the fear, the secrecy, and the emotional abuse inflicted by Eleanor. Clara testified about the trauma of learning she was adopted through fraudulent means, and the ensuing shame she felt upon realizing her connection to me. It was grueling, a public airing of our deepest wounds, but necessary for justice. During the trial, Mateo, Robert's brother, and Clara's biological father, the smuggler who sold her, was also apprehended, having been located through Eleanor's financial records. He was a small, miserable man, and his testimony confirmed Eleanor's role as the central organizer, the one who leveraged the vulnerability of birth parents and the desperation of adoptive parents, like the Thorns, for criminal profit. The sheer calculation of her cruelty was sickening. Eleanor's defense attempted to paint her as a surrogate mother driven by twisted love, but the evidence of her manipulation and financial gain was too great. Robert, cooperating fully, received a reduced sentence. Eleanor, the architect of both my misery and Clara's trauma, was sentenced to life in federal prison. Mateo received a significant sentence for child endangerment and aiding a criminal enterprise. It felt like a chapter closing, the long shadow of the Vances finally retreating it. With the legal battles settling, Clara and I made a deliberate choice to redefine our future. We sold the penthouse it felt tainted by the Elias Thorne, who never existed, and purchased a beautiful older home nestled in the quieter suburbs, a place we could truly make our own. We decided that our love was stronger than the criminal entanglement of our past. We were both victims of the same fate, and that shared experience became a bond, not a barrier. We chose to move forward, not as Elias and Clara, the successful CEO and the activist, but as Elias and Clara, two souls who found authentic love despite every force trying to tear them apart. We were cousins, yes, but more importantly, we were husband and wife, survivors and partners. The pain remained, a scar that would never fully disappear, but it was a scar we wore together, a testament to the nightmarish path we walked to find each other. The focus shifted entirely from the trauma of the past to the security of the present and the hope of the future. We had survived the ultimate identity crisis, found justice, and now only one thing remained: healing and moving forward hand in hand into a life finally free of lies.
And the ensuing shame she felt upon realizing her connection to me. It was grueling. A public airing of our deepest wounds, but necessary for justice. During the trial, Mateo, Robert's brother and Clara's biological father, the smuggler who sold her, was also apprehended, having been located through Eleanor's financial records. He was a small, miserable man, and his testimony confirmed Eleanor's role as the central organizer, the one who leveraged the vulnerability of birth parents and the desperation of adoptive parents, like the Thorns, for criminal profit. The sheer calculation of her cruelty was sickening. Eleanor's defense attempted to paint her as a surrogate mother driven by twisted love, but the evidence of her manipulation and financial gain was too great. Robert, cooperating fully, received a reduced sentence. Eleanor, the architect of both my misery and Clara's trauma, was sentenced to life in federal prison. Mateo received a significant sentence for child endangerment and aiding a criminal enterprise. It felt like a chapter closing, the long shadow of the Vances finally retreating. With the legal battles settling, Clara and I made a deliberate choice to redefine our future. We sold the penthouse. It felt tainted by the Elias Thorne who never existed, and purchased a beautiful older home nestled in the quieter suburbs, a place we could truly make our own. We decided that our love was stronger than the criminal entanglement of our past. We were both victims of the same fate, and that shared experience became a bond, not a barrier. We chose to move forward, not as Elias and Clara, the successful CEO and the activist, but as Elias and Clara, two souls who found authentic love despite every force trying to tear them apart. We were cousins, yes, but more importantly, we were husband and wife, survivors and partners. The pain remained, a scar that would never fully disappear, but it was a scar we wore together, a testament to the nightmarish path we walked to find each other. The focus shifted entirely from the trauma of the past to the security of the present and the hope of the future. We had survived the ultimate identity crisis, found justice, and now only one thing remained: healing and moving forward, hand in hand, into a life finally free of lies.